This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
St. John sets up this incredibly beautiful scenario in the 4th chapter and the 5th chapter. Last week we read from the 4th chapter. This week we read from the 5th chapter. So last week, Nicodemus and Jesus have this sparring match over birth and birth from above. And this week, Jesus and the Samaritan woman have a similar sort of conversation about water and living water. We cannot overlook the amazing contrasts between these two stories and these two people. Nicodemus, he is a man. He is a man who even gets a name. We are told he is a Jew, he is a Pharisee, he is a leader among the Jews. Today we have a woman who does not even rate a name. And not only is she a Samaritan, which we'll get to that, more of that, she is an outsider. But even as an outsider, she's an outsider among the outsiders. Nicodemus comes under cover of darkness. And even what changes happen in his life are not as apparent. We find more about him at the end of the gospel. But this woman, her encounter with Jesus happens in the bright of daylight, and she is utterly and completely exposed. Incredible contrasts. Now, one more thing about John's gospel that's really important before we dive in. John's gospel begins, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And that Word, Jesus, who is God and who is with God, chooses to step into our world. John is all about this incarnational God. That means a God who steps into our world. Jesus steps into flesh. Jesus steps into relationships. Today, it is Jesus who finds the woman. It's Jesus who initiates the conversation with the woman. It's Jesus who gives her the invitation. And it is through Jesus that she is reconciled. Background. Now, let's unpack the story. The first part of the story is Jesus is traveling through Samaria. Jesus is going from Judea to Galilee. Samaria is in between. Now, during David's reign, that was all, Samaria and Judea were all David's kingdom. But in 721, the Assyrians managed to defeat the northern kingdom. And they carted them off. Assyrians were brutal people. They carted them off with fish hooks. They took away all the people that had power. They took away the leaders. They took away the bigwigs. And they carted them all off. So what was left in Samaria were the laborers and the poor folk, and they intermarried with other folks. So what had happened in Samaria, where you had people that, yes, had Jewish background, but were now considered by the Jews to be half-breeds. Samaritans were to be avoided. You didn't share, you didn't come into relationship with them, you didn't share vessels with them. Even the religion that had the same fathers had diversified at least somewhat. So even though they were going from Judea to Galilee, good Jews did not go this way. Good Jews took days to go around to absolutely avoid Samaria. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus cuts right through the territory of the foreigners who were to be avoided. He cuts through. It's the heat of the day, middle of the day. This is the part of the world that things do not happen in the heat of the day. People shut down. The disciples have gone off to buy food, and there Jesus sits at the well, and along comes a woman. People did not work in the middle of the day. Who knows how far she had to come, and when she carried the heavy water back, how far she had to go. She was there in the middle of the day because she had to be there in the middle of the day. She had been booted out of polite society. She was not welcome there with the rest of the people. She wasn't welcome to go there and hear what was going on and who was the latest engagement. She had been pushed out of that. She is there in the middle of the day because she is an outcast among outcasts. She comes to the well, and it seems that Jesus has rather positioned himself right in her way. She comes and he asks her for a drink of water. He has talked to a woman. I don't know how we as 21st century Americans can have any clue what a huge faux pas that was. This week, as I was reading, I found two fabulous sayings. One of them was, "Men, you do not talk to women in public, no, not even your wife." Okay, guys, that wasn't meant as an out. And the second one was by a rabbi, that it was better to burn the word of the law than to feed it to a woman. Huge cultural peace between men and women. Men did not speak to women. Men certainly wouldn't have spoke to a Samaritan woman and asked for a drink of water that he would have needed to use her vessel. She knows all of these details. Why would you even talk to me? And from there unfolds this conversation about water and living water, which begs the question, if Jesus had his own living water, why would he need her vessel anyway? But another conversation for another day. They have this conversation, and I guess when that one kind of spins out, Jesus asks this intimate question. Go get your husband. There is no place in the text that says that she hung her head or that she took a deep pause or was shame-filled or she blushed. None of that is in the text. We can probably presume it. Now, in text study this week, there was one pastor that was saying, well, maybe she wasn't such a shady lady. You know, maybe they had all died and she'd just gotten passed on. In this culture, even if she had been passed on that way with the purity laws, she was clearly still, under best case scenario, she was tainted goods. Bring me your husband, Jesus says to her. And she cannot. She tells him the truth. I have no husband. And Jesus goes, yes, I know. And the very thing, that elephant that sits in the room every time she is around other people, Jesus speaks out loud. 5 by my count. And the one you're living with now, not your husband. Now, a very interesting thing. At that point, there seems to be no shame for her and no humiliation. Jesus has seen her and has known her. And she judges, she senses the difference. And she wants to go right into, oh my gosh, clearly you're a prophet. You see things. So let's have a theological conversation. How about worship, Jesus? We like to worship here in our own backyard, but you Jews say we need to go off to Jerusalem and Mount Zion. Truly, I tell you, Jesus says, the day is coming that we won't need to go anywhere, but that God will come to us and be among us. And I say to you, I am he. Wow. Wow. About this time, the disciples come back and they're puzzled, and and why is he chatting with this woman, and not supposed to happen. We're going to set the disciples apart. She has come face to face with God. She has come face to face. She has been known intimately. She has been touched. And now she abandons that jar. That's what she was there for. She abandons the water jar. And I'm not sure that that's not all she abandons. I think she abandons some old theology. I think she abandons some old shame and attitudes. Because where does she go? Back to the city. Those same people that have ostracized her, that have pushed her out, that's where she goes to preach what she has just experienced at the well. And she goes back there. And she says to them, you know that elephant in the room that we never talk about? You know, Harold and Joe and Bob and Jim and Dave, you know, and Randy, you know, all those husbands that I've had and we never talk about? A man just talked about it. He told me everything I have ever done. Don't you think it's incredibly fascinating that the same people that have pushed her out of their world believe because of what she is preaching to them, what she is testifying to them? Astonishing. Something has changed, something has shifted. They believe, and not only do they believe her word, they follow her back out to the well. Jesus has come to her. Jesus has spoken to her. Jesus has initiated relationship with her. And through that, she has been reconciled. She is no longer outside of the people. She's in the midst of them preaching. She's in the midst of them back at the well. Salvation has come to her. This story today is about revelation of self and revelation of the divine. She is seen. She's seen completely, and she is seen intimately, and she is staggered by Jesus' knowledge of her. She wants to be known, and she wants to be loved, and Jesus does both. She's restored. Reconciliation has landed. So, what does it mean for us? What does it mean as a church, this story? Well, first we have Jesus, who breaks down the boundaries, the geographical boundaries, the social boundaries, the theological boundaries, the personal boundaries. And Jesus isn't just breaking down boundaries for the sake of breaking down boundaries. He's breaking down boundaries so that he can deliver living water. He's breaking down the boundaries so that he can bring salvation, wholeness, reconciliation, forgiveness. So we who have been marked in the living waters, can we be any different than that woman? That we go back into our community and we say to others, come and see. Amen.
Well, this light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And every day, every day, every day, every day, every day, I let my little light shine. Oh, Jesus gave me light, I'm gonna let it